Yo guys, what is up? It's Andy here, back at you with another video, and today we are going to be discussing ORGASOILUX. I know a lot of you guys in the community have been growing with it. It's fairly new on the market, maybe about a year or two or so. It's been around before that, but then it had a big rebranding and it became available in all the retail shops. We've been selling heaps of it. It's a really nice product, and what we decided to do is take three of the top soils in the market, the Freedom Farm Classic Craft, ORGASOILUX, and the Anti-Fragile, and we decided to put them head to head in an actual analysis test. So we sent soil, put it in a container, sent it to America, to Logan Labs, and they did an analysis on it, and then we got those results back so that we can make sure that what we are telling you guys is the truth. And we have some really interesting results coming up, and of course we have to get someone in to help us through the results. It's Mike from Kaya Farms. He is light years more advanced on soil than myself and most humans, mere mortals, and he's really been a help in understanding all the different nuances in the soil, all the different micros and nutrients, macros and everything like that, and he basically breaks it down for us in like layman's terms. So it's really amazing, and let's check it out. Welcome everybody, and welcome Mike. Thank you so much for being available to go through these results with us. We've been waiting in quite some anticipation for it. And yeah, if those guys watching, we did do the Freedom Farm already. If you want to see that, it's also going to be linked below. And then we're going to do one more shortly on the Anti-Fragile from Freedom Farms as well. But today, show us what we've got and what we're working with the ORGASOILUX.
Okay, cool. Let's go. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we tested the ORGASOILUX from Jamie's Garden Shop. So just a quick situation for whoever hasn't watched the first video. We've got two tests on the screen. The one on the left-hand side, the blue one, is the standard test, which is going to give you an overall view of the total amount of nutrients present in your soil, whether it's available or not to the plant. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the saturated paste report, which is giving you a snapshot in time of how many of those total nutrients you saw in the previous test are available to the plant.
I liked your analogy. Like the bank is the one on the left. That's like what's like the total capacity, and then like the one on the right, sort of like your wallet. Like that's what's available right then. Because some things are going to turn into, are going to dissolve and sort of be available later on, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Exactly. Awesome. That's it. Yeah. That's a good analogy. Yeah. So let's start with the standard. So whenever we're looking at those tests, obviously the more interesting one, or giving you the more actual information, would be the saturated paste, because that's what we want to know, is what's available to the plant. Although it's great to know what's the total anyway as well. So yeah, let's start with the saturated paste. So you can probably see my cursor. So the pH, let's start with pH, 6.7. That's really good pH. It's perfectly in range. It's better to have a higher pH than a lower pH. pH on the low end will create more issue than pH on the higher end. I mean, you can even go up to 7 and above and still have perfectly good plants. So 6.7 is great. So for whoever is going to use the soil, I would be careful when adding liming agents like calcitic lime, dolomite lime. All those liming agents will increase your pH. You're going to throw the soil off balance if you add too much. So rather, if you want to add calcium, rather add gypsum. The soluble salt, 1,000. That's also a really good number. I like to see that. It's so the soluble salt is basically giving you the total available nutrient. It's an information that gives you the total available nutrients in the soil. And you can see at 1,000 ppm, it's a good soil. It's got good nutrient, but it's not going to burn or create any osmotic stress on your plants. When I say osmotic stress, I'm going to probably mention it a few times. I refer to the burning that you might see in synthetic nutrients. You know, when you add too much, you start to see the leaf tip of the plant burning. So that's heavy osmotic stress. In organic, we rarely see such stress or visual symptoms where the tips are burning. You'll just have a slower growth in your plant, which is hard to notice because you don't always have a comparison. But high soluble salt would create osmotic stress and could potentially hinder the growth of your plant. They will grow slower. So if it's too elevated, you're going to have problems. If it's too low, it's just not enough food. Chloride and bicarbonate. That's also a good, it's very closely related with your osmotic stress. Too much of it's gonna impact that. It's gonna impact the plant a lot. So at the moment, the chloride is quite elevated. I would rather see it under 100. But at the same time, it's easy to fix because chloride is quite mobile. So if you do 1 or 2 heavy watering and you let the water run out, it will diminish the chloride a lot. Yeah, so it's a possibility. If you're having a plant that is extremely stressed in the soil and is not reacting well, you could potentially do that because it is a bit elevated, but it's nothing horrible. The bicarbonate also a little elevated, but not too bad. Actually, quite all right, I would say. I wouldn't even do anything about it. Okay, and then now looking at the nutrients, so sulfur at 41 ppm, that's a good number. Anything 60, 80 up to 100 is all right, especially cannabis, because we know sulfur is responsible for flavors and smells, etc. So it's good to have it there. And then if you refer back on the standard, you can see sulfur at 204 ppm. It's a little low, so it's nicely available. But it's not, I mean, it's good. It's in range, definitely in range.
You might have to supplement towards at some
yeah,
point.
if you have, I mean, by the end of flowering, a little bit of boost and sulfur is going to improve your terps. Yeah, definitely. Especially if you've been using the soil since the beginning of veg.
Brilliant.
The phosphorus, you can see 2.18 ppm. So phosphorus, you see, like if you look at sulfur, 204 ppm, and it translates into 41 ppm into the standard test. So it's a lot. But if you compare the phosphorus, which is 251, and there's only 2 ppm flowing into the solution, so that's because phosphorus is very biologically, it's cycled biologically. It's very closely related to the microbial activity in your soil. So if you're not adding any phosphorus, your plant are going to depend a lot on the biological activity to cycle it. So that's where adding all your microbes and etc. will definitely help, like your mycorrhizas, parenthesis, but other microbes, phosphorus solubilizing microbe, etc. But 2.18 is good. 2 to 4 is great. I wouldn't want to see it too high though. Anything above 10 is getting a bit high. And yeah, you see in the standard, there's plenty of phosphorus. So if you ever were to test your soil again and you see you have plenty of phosphorus in your standard but none in your saturated paste, then one good solution would be to increase your biological, so put microbes and try and increase the life to cycle it better. So yeah, phosphorus is great. Then the soluble cations, that's a very important part of your soil. I would say it's probably the most important part. This is crucial. The balance and sufficiency in those levels, in those nutrients is critical to growing a healthy crop. So looking at them, calcium at 105, it's a little low. I'd like to see almost double that if possible, especially for early veg. So that's something. Again, every soil test I've done in the country follows the same principle. Everyone has the same issues. It's nothing specific to anyone. Calcium is often low, magnesium is often high, sodium is often high, and that's a basic thing. It's often you'll see all soils have that. And like you see, it's a similar story here. The calcium is a little low, so that would be a nice thing to increase, especially if you're going to use the soil in veg. If you're using it in flower, you can do with a little bit less calcium, but in veg, you want to supplement calcium. Magnesium, 43. That's a little high, but not crazy. So I would make sure not to add any magnesium in my soil, because again, another interesting thing is when calcium is low and magnesium is all right, you can always assume that if you bring your calcium up to levels, your magnesium is going to shoot up, because calcium loosens the soil, whereas magnesium tightens the soil. And when you add more calcium, you're loosening the soil and you're allowing for more of that magnesium to flow into the soil solution. And you can see here the magnesium into the standard test is not excessively high, but it's rather high on the saturated paste. And when you're going to add your calcium, you're going to release more of that magnesium and let it flow into the saturated paste. So magnesium, I never add magnesium unless I see a deficiency in my plant, and then if I correct it, it's through a foliar. I never add it because it's always too high. Even in my soil that I've been working on years, it's too high. Potassium, very important nutrient, gets uptaken by the plants a lot, and it's very crucial in flowering to create heavy, dense flowers and proper weight in your plants. So 117 is good. It's definitely within range. I would like to see it a little higher just to provide sufficiency, especially considering you're going to run a cycle through that soil. But it's very good. It's within range. And as you can see, you've got good reserves of potassium as well. So that's great. Sodium is quite elevated. And again, it's a similar story as I was saying with the chloride. Sodium is highly mobile and you can very easily leach it out of the soil by watering a large amount of water. So you could bring that down. Your plants are going to be fine when you grow in it, but they might grow a little slower than if that was lower, because again, like we were saying, osmotic stress created by the chloride, the sodium. So that's going to affect, that can affect your plant a little bit, but again, easy to fix, not horrible. And again, be careful of adding kelp meal into a soil like this, because that's heavy in sodium and you'll definitely push that sodium up, which you don't want to do. Then the percentages, so that's, you've got the quantity, so you can establish sufficiency with those numbers, the ppm, and then with the calcium you can establish the balance, which are both extremely important. Sufficiency comes before balance, but if you don't have a good balance, you're going to be held back. And as you can see, the calcium, I mean, the bar doesn't really show. It's quite low. So at the moment, this is going to hold you back a little bit. But again, easy to fix. Just hoist some gypsum in your soil, and you're gonna bring your sulfur up, and you're gonna bring your calcium up as well. So yeah, I would definitely look at raising that calcium. You want it in the 50, 60%. So this needs to go up. So yeah, magnesium also a little high, not too crazy. Potassium also within range. But then again, the culprit is the sodium. Sodium is occupying 23%, which is quite high. You do want that lower. But again, all soils are heavy in sodium. It's always a thing. Like I rarely see a soil with very low sodium. So yeah, sodium would be something I would want to look at and try and bring down. Especially if you're going to put a new plant in if you're buying a pot of soil and you're going to plant a seed in it, I would recommend bleaching it to lower the osmotic stress it's going to cause on that plant, because it's so young, it's not going to be as resilient. Whereas if you're going to transplant something in there, it's not as crucial because your plant is already established and it's strong, and so you'll be all right. There's nothing so far that is a really a big red flag that would make me say do not plant. It's all it's all right. It's all fixable and nothing horrible. Just before we go through the trace elements, I just want to hop onto the standard test and go down to the ammonium and nitrates, which is it is on the standard test, but I mean, you could have it on either or. Nitrate is nitrate. It doesn't change between a standard or a saturated paste. It's just nitrate. And it's also available to the plants. So ammonium and nitrate. So yeah, that's the two forms of nitrogen that the plant will uptake. Nitrate primordially. I mean, ammonium is really just it's more the big trees, etc., that take ammonium. But the interesting information that you can pick up on ammonium is looking at so it's 1.2 at the moment ppm. When it is 1 ppm, you can assume your soil has been fully cooked, fully composted. There's not going to be any nitrogen turned into nitrates. So you can assume that whatever nitrate number you see, it's not going to change if you leave your soil be. But as soon as you go over 1, it indicates that it still has some nitrogen that is being converted into nitrates. So for example, in this case, 262 is not the final number. It's the number right now, but if you let the soil fully sit, fully compost for a while, the 0.2 is going to the 0.2 is going to be converted in nitrate, and it's going to raise it a little bit. You're going to end up at 280, 300 somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's a good indication. 1.2 is great. It's fine. You have a little bit of nitrate that's still going to be converted. It's nothing. It's good. If you see this number extremely elevated, there's potential for you, and this number very low nitrate, there's potential for your soil being anaerobic. That's something to know. But yeah, looking at the nitrate, which is really what we want to see, 262 is quite high. I like seeing it around 150 somewhere there. It's at the beginning in veg, and then obviously I taper it down, and I like to finish around the 40s in flowering, at the end of flowering, just to avoid leaving that green taste in your buds, and you know, just it helps a lot. Too much. I mean, I have friends in the US that are telling me their beds are so heavy in nitrogen that the plant starts to make seeds almost. They're not I'm forgetting the word. But it makes weird seeds. Like the nitrogen is just so high, the plant starts doing extremely strange things. So anything above 300, you'll see your plant doing things that you've never seen before. 262, it's okay. It's definitely going to go down as you water it and as you put your plants in. So it's a good amount of reserves, but it is a little bit high. So that could, at the beginning, slow your plant down again. You know, the osmotic stress we were talking about. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. Better to have a little excess than too little. Because too little, your plant's not going to grow.
Yeah.
So out of interest, the nutrient that will affect the final biomass of your plant the most is, as in, if you have a deficiency, your plant is going to have a seriously reduced yield. That will be your potassium, your nitrogen, your boron, and your copper. Those have very strong influence in your final yield. Whereas other nutrients, through studies, they haven't found a massive difference in biomass. So a deficiency of magnesium, it's not going to hurt your yield that much. A deficiency in potassium, though, that's going to hurt your yield a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so carrying on with the trace elements, I'll start with boron on the saturated paste at 0.1. That's good. 0.2 would be better, but 0.1 is fine. You still have it. Iron 0.59. Yeah, that's okay. A little bit higher is around just under 1. It's good. But that's all right. And manganese is okay, but I would really like to see it higher. I've found that cannabis is very manganese hungry, especially in flowering. It just takes up a lot of manganese. Out of all the trace elements, copper, zinc, etc., manganese to me is the one that gets uptaken quite a lot. Boron as well.
Yeah.
But
And those are sitting at the lowest.
And manganese is a bit low, yeah. So I would look at increasing that. The copper and zinc, you don't really see a good indication on the saturated paste because they don't flow into the soil solution very well. So for those, you want to go back onto your standard test, and you can see zinc. Like always, zinc is good. Like I've never seen a soil that is bad deficiency in zinc. Funny enough. So zinc is good, and aluminum, yeah, it's within range as well. You can see aluminum, if you go back on the saturated paste, we want it below 1. Anything above 1 is, you might, it's cause for concern, or at least to look into it. You want to see why your aluminium is so high. And the biggest thing with aluminium is you don't want your pH to go too acidic, because when it starts to drop, the intake of aluminium increases in the plant. So as long as your pH is within range, 6.7, 5, around there, you won't have a problem with aluminium. It's not going to be it's a non-issue. Yeah.
Super interesting.
So yeah, and again, something with boron, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, all those trace elements. If anyone wants to start playing with them and raising them, I would just advise to be cautious. This is very easy to over apply, and an excess of one of those will wreak havoc in your garden. It's bad. So be very mindful. It's better to be on the lower side than on the higher side. And this is also why a lot of soil makers, they often have slightly low trace elements, because it's such a risky thing to add. I mean, if you have one error, if you add too much, or if you don't mix it well enough, then you have a bad batch and people will have issues in their garden. So those elements are tricky. Like we're talking about milliliters per 1,000 liters of soil.
Yes, parts per million. It's already like 0.08 parts per million.
Exactly.
It's super low.
Yeah. So yeah, the soil in essence, I would say, is a good soil. It's not a particularly heavy soil. That's another number I didn't mention. Sorry. The total exchange capacity is 17. So anything around 10, 15, I would consider a light soil. And in the 2025, I would consider a heavy soil. What I mean by that is not to do with the weight, but it has to do with the nutrient holding capacity, holding capacity of the soil. So a heavy soil will have a lot more nutrients than a light soil. So this is an in-between. It's not particularly heavy. It's not particularly light. It's a good in-between. So yeah, great for, it's good for plants of almost all age, I would say. I mean, young plants, obviously just be a little careful because they're just sensitive. But other than that, it's all good. The biggest thing I would look at is bringing down the chloride, if possible, and the sodium, if you're going to try and bring something down. And I would focus on increasing that calcium. I wouldn't touch potassium, it's good. I mean, you can supplement it, but I would really look at increasing that calcium. That's going to be a big thing. And then, yeah, if anyone wants to add manganese, go for it. It's tricky, but it's doable.
Us as MSA, we've obviously recommended the soil for a long time. I mean, we do know where it's been going. I think Jamie, he's done a bunch of videos with us. You guys can also check that out. He's also super knowledgeable in the growing space, and that's kind of where how we became to love the soil. And also, yeah, there's some soils we have seen just they've got seed killing attributes and things like that. So I mean, like these, it's nice to know from your opinion that it's safe for sort of all stages. Yeah, no, I'm super happy with the results. I think there is some interesting parts where the soil could be improved. And some places, and also there is a consistency element to it. So, it might be nice for us to do a future test and see how it still relies, because if this is the soil you like it for its composition, and when you go back, you want that same composition. So yeah, basically, guys, that's just about a wrap. Thank you so much, Mike, for coming on and giving us this info. Mike does have these tests available for if you have a soil that you need to get tested. You can always just check out the links below. And yeah, as always, thank you so much, Mike, and looking forward to doing the anti-fragile next week.
Yes.
Awesome.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.